Hey guys, Levy Freeman here. Today I wanted to do a video on defense, like a defense guide for Hearts of Iron 4. I saw there were a couple, like a guide that was posted recently where I thought they really missed the mark in terms of like pretty much every major topic you want to discuss when you're talking about how you're supposed to defend properly. And the video that was posted is mainly just a specific build for entrenchment stacking for 1936 France. So I thought I would offer my opinion on how to the basics of what you want to think about if you find yourself on the defense. And I think one of the important points to consider is that you don't have a time machine when you're playing this game. So if you suddenly find yourself on the defensive, like maybe a country that you didn't expect to declare war on you declared war on you, or one of your allies capitulated and you have a front line that you have to deal with that maybe you weren't thinking you're going to have to deal with. Maybe you didn't think you were going to be on the defense. And as a result, if your entire defensive strategic toolbox consists of bullshit about entrenchment stacking, you cannot go back to 1936 with a time machine unless you want to save scum and change your whole build so that you have a grand battle plan and entrenchment and all your advisors, you pick defensive ones, right? That's not going to fly. You can't do that. So you need to think about like what are the basics of actually defending. And for a lot of the parts, like for mechanically anyways, it's basically the same as on offense. But we'll talk about some of these differences. All right, so first up, let's get the game on over here, get the game scene. All right, so we're playing NSIG mod right now, and I thought I would show this in the browser just because, out of the games they had available that I can still load with the current versions I have, this NSIG mod game was one of the ones where we're on the defense. This is, of course, the 1944 starting scenario, which is a pretty difficult defensive scenario to win. You can watch this campaign on our channel as well. So the first difference that you have when you're going to be on the defense is that you have a choice of where you want to set up your guys. And the enemy, of course, can choose where on your line they want to attack, but you get to pick where you set your defensive line up. Whereas when you're attacking, like you don't really have that luxury. You can, like I said, you can choose where on the line you want to push, but you're going to have to push, and there's a limited number of places you can do that, and the defender gets to pick where he wants to set up. That's one of your advantages as a defender. And kind of what goes hand in hand with that is terrain pretty much always benefits the defender. So if you're able to pick things like behind river crossings and in forests and stuff like that, those are going to help you a lot. Another thing too, as a defender, is attrition is almost always going to be way worse for the attacker. Like as a defender, if all you're doing is defending, you can expect to take very little attrition. I think the only thing you really need to worry about is if you're defending an undersupplied zone. But again, as a defender, you can choose just to not defend there if you have problems with supplies. So attrition, usually not a huge deal when you're defending. And you want to use these things to your advantage when you decide where you want to set up. So when you're picking your defensive line, you want to think about like if you're outnumbered by the enemy, and if you're on the defense, probably that's going to be the case. You're defending because the enemy has an advantage on you, and you can't attack into them, right? So you need to think about what you can start doing to kind of limit that advantage towards that the enemy has. Like one of the things, like if you defend across a river, eventually you're going to get to the bridge tactics phase in the assault, and in the combat, I mean. And once you have bridge tactics, that cuts combat width by 50%. So if you only have 40 width per tile, and tiles are usually 80 width combat, the defender, as soon as those tactics come up, they can only fight with 40 combat width, but you only had 40 combat width in the first place, so you don't really get hit by that, but the attacker does. So you can kind of try and mitigate a numbers advantage by using rivers. That's kind of why rivers are very nice defensive terrain. The other thing you can kind of do is try and utilize choke points to try and choke the defender out. Like if you're trying to defend the Caucasus, like if you have like over here, you have like a 2-tile choke point over here, and over here in the middle, there's like I think a 1-tile choke where they can attack through over here. And you have over on the other side over here, I think you can get these two over here as well, like a 2-tile choke point. So if you decide to defend in these areas, like this tile, these two tiles over here, it can be really difficult, no matter how many divisions the opponent has, to try and crack these because they can't really bring their numbers to bear. Whereas if you had decided like to set up over here on a longer front line, or like over here and try and defend more territory, if you're playing like the Caucasus countries in Kaiserreich, for example, if you choose to set your defensive line up on like a longer front, you're going to allow the enemy to bring their numbers to bear, and you're going to be at a disadvantage. So you want to think about that, which is like, and that's another reason too why it's considered a little bit cheesy. But like one of the things that you can do over here is you can start releasing these nations. And if you release them not as a puppet, they won't be in the war. So like if you decide you want to go release Austria, for example, that would put a neutral country over here, and then you wouldn't have to defend any of this land down here. That would be neutral. Soviets can attack through it, and you can shift your front line to something like this, which would get rid of all this combat width that you have to defend, and it's going to make it more likely that you can achieve parity on the front. So like that's like the whole like releasing nations and using puppets as border states and using impassable terrain. You can use your advantage that you have as a defender in choosing where to set up to try and use those chokes, try and use that terrain, try and use your puppet buffers to try and take away the attacker's advantage of overwhelming numbers. Also, when you're thinking about terrain too, it's like you don't want to set up in plain styles. Plain styles have no modifier, and plain styles are great for the attacker because they get to attack on you with no attrition and no disadvantage, unless there's like mud or something like that, like a weather effect. But like even like the forest over here, you have 80% attack modifier, so they lose 20% attack right off the hop. And if you look at something like a tank unit, like some of these guys are going to have extra negative modifiers for attacking into these terrain types over here too, in addition to taking attrition. So if you look at something like a mountain tile, for example, you set up in a mountain, right away that drops attack to 40% and inflicts 40% attrition, in addition to reducing enemy air support by 10%. So you want to shop around for good tiles to defend in, like urban, forests, mountains. I mean, hills aren't terrible either. But you don't want to really be setting up in plain styles unless you're behind a river, if you can avoid it. So you see like this fallback line we've picked. The other thing as a defender too, like you want to look at where your factories are. Like a lot of this land over here has very few factories. The terrain's not really defensible. It doesn't hurt us that much to give it up and get better defensive terrains. Like that's what we did in this scenario, is we pulled back and we have this kind of double fallback line to give us an additional buffer. So if the enemy starts breaking through, we have some troops behind there to kind of stop them from like really blobbing out. There'll be troops behind to catch that. We can also do some org wall if we have to. So like that's the plan that we did over here. We fell back and we utilized rivers. We used terrains. We used urban. We use all this stuff over here to try and make our life defending a little bit easier, as opposed to like over here when you get raffle stomped over here. These are just plain styles. You can push into this easily, and once the enemy starts getting momentum over there, that's how your guys start getting cut off, and things start really going downhill. So strategically, those are some of the advantages you have as a defender, and you want to make sure that you're setting up in places that are smart. And you're not defending territory it's not worth it to defend. You want to make the attacker's life as difficult as possible. Another kind of key concept too when you're defending is like kind of in a similar idea too, is if you can close a front because you have a front with a weaker enemy. Sometimes like the whole Schleifen plan idea where you murder the weaker enemy first and then swing your entire army around back, and that's how you kind of deal with that longer front line, or being outnumbered too, like being outnumbered in terms of number of enemies. Sometimes you can do that and close up a front faster. And if you watch our NC campaign, that's essentially what we did. Is we went through over here and killed France and then turned our tanks around over here to face the Soviets. And in our 1939 France survival attempt game, like the strategy that stuck was we rushed Italy first, and then we forced Germany to defend the Eastern Alps over here, and like we stretched the German front line over here, and they didn't have any of the Italian divisions to help them out to pressure us over here. They had to do that themselves. So even if you're on the defense, sometimes if you can close a front by doing a quick offense over there, will really help you. That's another kind of strategy to keep in your back pocket as like another idea. So let's go ahead and we're going to load up another save game over here. And this is the one where after we've just killed France, and we'll look at some actual combat bubbles and we'll talk about some mechanics for defense over here. And mechanics speaking for defense are basically the same as they are for offense. Like the same things happen in the combats, right? Like attack still does the same thing, defense and breakthrough, that all still does the same thing, whether you're the attacker or the defender. So if you're attacking, you understand the mechanics. It's just you're on the defensive side now, and the things that apply to your enemy now apply to you. And but it's the same general idea. And like same thing with air and whatnot. Defenders, of course, have entrenchment. Attackers get planning. So when you look at the combat bubbles, let's see if we can pick one over here. Yeah, that's one that's even. Sure, okay. So we have something like this over here, and this combat's like going pretty poorly. It looks like we're actually attacking over here. Maybe let's grab a different bubble. Sure. How about this one over here? This is fine. Okay, so here we're defending. The opponent's attacking us across the river. And just as like a quick refresher, you have like your different tactics over here, and these are random number guides for every hour. You can see what they have over here, and sometimes you get ones that are good, sometimes you get ones that aren't so good, sometimes you get countered, and that depends on your general level. But for defending, like the big one that you're looking for over here is if you're across a river, eventually you'll wind up in the bridges phase, you get that combat width reduction. So both you and your opponent will be forced to pick tactics that have combat width reduction of 25% for a total of negative 50%. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet in this combat. But if this combat width dropped to 60, our 40 versus their 60 is a lot better than our 40 versus their 120. So in terms of the stats over here, you see we have soft attack, hard attack, and you have your breakthrough. And on the defensive side, we have soft attack, hard attack, and defense. So the defensive stat when you're attacking is breakthrough. The defensive stat when you're defending is defense. Attack does the same thing. And attacks, of course, you can see over here, hardness will decrease the amount of soft attacks you take and increase the amount of hard attacks you take. So for every point of attack that targets a unit, you can use 1 point of defense to block that attack, and that turns the attack from having a 0.4% or a 0.4 chance of doing damage to a 0.1 chance of doing damage. So an unblocked attack is 4 times more effective than a blocked attack. And once you've blocked everything, having additional defense or breakthrough does not matter. And whichever unit your unit decides to target is random. So, this guy could attack this guy could attack that guy. It depends. It's random. Same for this guy. And if your units gang up on one unit, they can work together to try and overcome their defense. That's how that works. So if you look at this over here, you can see our units have 129 attack and 147 attack, which is better than most of their breakthroughs. We'll get some attacks at the 0.4 or with a 0.4 chance to the 0.1. And on the incoming side, these guys all have sub 100 attack, which means both of these units are going to have way more than enough defense to block everything. So you can see we're making some money off this river crossing too, because we're behind a river. They're taking this penalty to their breakthrough and their attack, which is going to be benefiting us greatly. Those are big modifiers. So when you look at that, a lot of some of the dumbest advice I find on Hearts of Iron 4 comes from what I think is like monkey see, monkey do, where because a stat is called defense, someone gets in their head that the more defense I have must be better because it's called defense. Defense must be good for defense, right? Therefore, we have to grab everything that gives defense, we'll pick, and that'll make us a better defender, which is, of course, bullshit, because we just discussed that these are threshold stats. And once you have enough defense to block the incoming attacks, every other point of defense that you invested in is a complete waste. You might as well have had attack. Attack will always be useful. So once you get to late game 2, your infantry units generally have way more than enough defense that more things invested into defense is kind of a waste. So that's something you want to consider about when you're picking out what techs you want to take. Do I really need more defense, or is this just going to be wasted? And the same thing goes for tanks. Like if you look at a 40 width tank division, let's see, where's our 40 width tanks here? These guys over here. Yeah, these guys have like 1200 breakthrough almost, and they have 67% hardness. And if you look at the stats of like a defending infantry unit, like what they're going to have over there, it's like these guys are going to tickle a tank unit. Like 1200 is overkill, way too much overkill. Like even if there were 8 of these in this tile for full combat width over here, and you look at the difference between these stats over here, it's like you're not even going to come anywhere close. This unit with 26 hard attack, and you might be doing you might be doing like, I don't know, maybe half of that 60 and 10. You might be doing 70 per unit times times 8. It's like you're not even coming close. You're not even coming close to hitting 1200. So that's kind of why, if you look at the doctrine tree, and like another monkey see, monkey do, they say, oh, this is tanks. Blitzkrieg is for tanks. So I'm going to take Blitzkrieg doctrine. This must be better for tanks. But when you look at what you get over here, it's like you get more organization on the mobile infantry side most of the time. And all this does is give you effectively a little bit of recovery rate because this 20% breakthrough is almost always a complete waste on your tank unit. So it's like a big dumb monkey move to go and assume that Blitzkrieg is the best if you're going to be playing tank heavy. Unless you need this 20% breakthrough because you're playing with like Space Marines or a 20-width division setup, almost always it's better to go mobile infantry, even if you're fielding a lot of 40-width tank divisions. So that's just like another pet peeve I have, where people recommend Blitzkrieg and they're going to be fielding 15-5 tank divisions or another 40-width tank division setup. And they say that, breakthrough will help us cut through infantry faster. It's like, that's not what breakthrough does. You're new. So anyways, back on topic over here. So one of the big mechanical differences, probably like the most important mechanical difference between attack and defense, is the reserves mechanic over here, right? So let's see if we have a tile, like let's say this one over here. If the attacker wants to send more units into combat, they don't have to go through the reserve system. They can just stop their attack and start it again with the units they want to attack with, and they can get that combat started again instantly with all the units that they wanted to attack and come at you. Defense doesn't work that way. You can't. If you're the defender, you can't say, "Oh no, you got to stop over here. I need to reset my defense." That's not going to work. So if you're being pressured and your units start falling back, you need to pass a reinforce roll to reinforce the front line. You see right now this is 0% because we're full up already, which is okay. Which is like, you can kind of see where this starts to get a little bit dangerous, but I'll explain it to you here anyways. So each unit is going to have a chance of reinforcing. I'll see if I can find one. We're defending, and we have reserves that can actually reinforce. There might not be one at the moment. Might not be one at the moment. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is. I think we're pretty much full up everywhere. Let's unpause, and I'll send a unit in so you can kind of see. Or maybe I can't do that. We'll have this guy move over here, for example, and we'll see if we can actually get there in time. I'm not going to actually try and win this scenario, obviously. But so we'll click this combat bubble. So we'll see if this guy can get there in time. He's probably not going to make it. Let's send this guy in over here. We'll see if we can get something. Do you have a tank division? Yeah, I do. Okay, here we go. We got one over here. So we need to pass these reinforced rolls to get in. You can see right now this is only a 6% chance. So if you have a situation like we have on this tile over here, where we have some units in reserve, but our units at the front are getting pretty low organization, there is a chance, because these guys have to pass a roll before they can join the combat, that if all of these guys lose their organization before these guys pass a reinforced roll, it doesn't matter how many units you have in reserve, you're going to lose that tile. Once you have no divisions in the combat line that have organization anymore, and the last unit falls back, you lose the tile, regardless of how many units you have in reserve and how much org you had in reserve. So that can get a little bit dicey. You can see right now, these guys have to reinforce it at 6%. And if none of these guys pass a roll fast enough, and these guys all get de-org before they do, you lose that tile. So that's like another important mechanic. So reinforce rate is very important on defense, because you cannot choose to just stop and start combats at will to make sure that you get the units that have org and the units that you want to fight in combat, like the attacker can. So as a result, technologies like radio, or like even the signals companies, usually I wouldn't put signal companies in all your infantry units because it's like a little bit expensive to do so. You don't really want to be wasting all this production on support companies, especially when you could have extra infantry instead or something like that, in my opinion. But the radio attack is like an absolutely must-have. Absolutely must-have. So if you look over here, I'll put up on the screen. Let's see over here, go scene 4. Yeah, so this is a graph from the HOI4 wiki. It talks about the chance to reinforce versus the different technologies. So you have your baseline over here. You guys can see that. And if you have the radio attack, you get over here. So it's like having the radio attack makes a pretty big difference in your chance to actually join the combat given a certain number of hours. Signal Companies 1 is a pretty big jump. But then after that, it's like you start to get a little bit diminishing returns with the further levels of signal companies. So whether or not it's worth it to invest the research into 1942 and 1945 signals, even 1939 signals, whether or not that's worth it is up to you. But you can get this graph on the wiki. And radio makes a huge difference, and all of your guys get it. It costs you no production, so there's no reason not to get radio if you think you're going to be on the defense. Of course, if you're on the offense, it doesn't matter as much. Anyways, back to the game here. Back to the game. So, one of the things that you want to do as a defender to avoid that situation from happening is you're going to want to do org cycling. And I'll see if I can pull up a video over here where we're doing that. Again, this is like probably a little bit tough to show on this over here. Maybe we can do it over here. So org cycling, essentially, you see these guys are all kind of getting a little bit low org. Is we're going to take a unit over here. We'll order this guy to move in. What's the combat width here anyways? It's 80. So like this is maybe a little bit maybe suboptimal, but we're going to move one unit over here. We'll have one guy fall back. This guy's in low org anyways. We wouldn't really have to cycle this guy because we have combat width available anyways. But this is essentially what you do, though. Is like, so you have this guy come over here, and this guy got caught. You got pinned, so we'll have him retreat onto this tile instead. So we pull our low org unit back, and we put our full org unit up. They'll go into reserve, but because we pulled the unit back, he'll actually be able to reinforce. Then he gets in there. And now we have a full org unit, which means even if these guys start getting pushed back, this guy will be able to hold it up until more reinforcements can arrive. And ideally you have a tile like this one back here. It's like if you pull this guy over here, we'll send maybe one of these guys back over this way. And once you have a tile over here that's no longer in combat, the unit that just fell back can sit on this tile and regain its organization. Let's go up to 5 speed here. So we do that, and these guys are all. I'll just delete this front line order. You don't want your units moving back to the front line after they've fallen back. So we had this guy move back. Oh, this guy move over here. Yeah, like I think this is like a pretty rough example. I'm not really set up to do this, but I'll show you some from our France game maybe. This isn't gonna. It's not really set up to do that example, but we'll go over here. I'll show you one of our games from France, from our 1939 France game. Let's go back to the browser over here. So we have essentially what's going on here is we have these two lines of infantry. You see, one on the front line and one on the back line. And what we're going to do over here is we're going to look and we see, look, these guys are low organization, so we'll pull them back to a tile that's not being attacked. This is on a different border than the Germans. And we'll move a unit in over there to cover. And we're going to do this across our entire line for the units that are low org, and we fill them back with units that are full org from the second line tiles. And the reason you want to have the second line here is so that your unit can actually sit in this tile. It's not going to go back up to the front line. It's going to sit on this back tile, and it's going to regain organization where it's safe and cannot be pressured. Your units do not regain organization when they're sitting in reserves. So if your unit falls back and then moves back up to the front line again, it only recovers a quarter of its organization and is sitting in reserve on the front line because you stacked 10 units on it, then those units aren't going to recover organization, and that's like a huge waste. So you pull your low org units back, and once they're on the tiles in the back row, they can safely recover their organization, and once they're full up on org again, you can cycle them back in. And that's like the very basic defensive tactic. That's org cycling, and every Hearts of Iron player should know how to do that so that they can hold these lines. And as long as you're org cycling and you're respecting your reinforce rate and you're keeping fresh organization in combat, the AI is going to have like a really hard time breaking you if you have a setup like this. You can see we've got good terrain. We have a second line. We're recovering. Like our organization in the back is safe. They can't pressure it, so we get free recovery, and we're able to keep on cycling back and forth. And there's always organization on the front. Like no matter how much they attack, they're not able to de-org us before we can recover and cycle. So like that's like the basic org wall. Like I'm not sure if I'm going to click in any of these combat bubbles. Like you don't really need to. You can just kind of see when you click on the tiles which guys are low org, which aren't. And you cycle back and forth like that. The other advantage of having the second line is like if you did screw up and the opponent does make a breakthrough, they can't immediately push and start snaking and encircling and threatening a breakthrough, because you have a second line that's already entrenched back over here, and that's going to be able to stop them from doing that. And that's like another reason. So entrenchment stacking, sure, that's all fine and good. Entrenchment stacking as a strategy for defense only works if you have enough firepower on your entrenchment line to stop enemy attacks and allow yourself to recover organization. As soon as you have to start moving, like you see we're cycling in and out like this, and those combats are basically going on forever, I guess those units are going to have very little entrenchment, right? Because once you move up from the second line, you're not going to have any time to entrench, and there's a continuous combat going on. The Germans aren't stopping to attack. We don't have the stats to block those attacks. Sorry, we don't have the stats to de-org the number of units that are coming at us. They can keep on attacking way more than we can do damage to them. So we're just trying to hold on as long as we can with this org cycling tactic. So against a superior enemy, if you're not able to have the stat advantage, you're able to stop the attacks in their tracks and you have to org cycle, entrenchment does very little for you once you start having to cycle. So if you're not sure if you're going to be able to get enough, then maybe the entrenchment tactic isn't the correct tactic to use. That's another important concept, so I thought I would throw that out there. Another thing too, when you look at the defensive doctrines, I think the guide in question recommended Grand Battle Plan is hands down the best doctrine. We'll go back to the NC game over here, but if you look at like what you get over here too, so one, if you're not going to be getting entrenchment because you're going to have to, you expect that you might have to org cycle, then like superior firepower, this will give you the extra. I think this is 20% NC, but this is it's been nerfed, of course, in regular Hearts of Iron 4 to 10%. The extra attack and the org and the defense and stuff that you get from superior firepower might be more value if you're not going to be able to make use of this first plus 10 entrenchment. This is where a lot of the defensive power of this doctrine comes from, is from that max entrenchment buff and the entrenchment speed. So like if you're forced into a cycling motion like that, then getting the extra attack and benefits from superior firepower might be better. And if you really want to go into the org cycling, you get reinforce rate from mass assault, and you also get recovery rate, like quite a bit of it. I think over here, yeah, recovery rate, org, and then you get some more recovery rate, and org, you get some entrenchment over here, and you get reinforce rate 2% up over there. So radio plus reinforce rate over here is very cheap to have a decent reinforce rate, and then you have recovery, which means your units, when they're sitting on the back line, are going to recover very fast, which means you can cycle a lot easier with them. They don't have to sit in the back, and they can go back up to the front faster for recovering organization. So because of those reasons, mass mobilization is one of the best defensive doctrines in the game, because it's so easy to org cycle with this stuff over here. It's not hands down Grand's Battle Plan is the best defensive doctrine. You have to think. It's the best for entrenchment stacking, that is a true say, but is it the best overall for defense? That depends, and if you're going to go with an org wall strategy as opposed to entrenchment stacking, then mass mobilization is much better. And org wall is very powerful, especially if you have not great units and you just need to hold on for a long time. Org wall is one of the most powerful defensive strats you can do. So you want to keep that in your back pocket. Let's see, other stuff I wanted to talk about over here. So we talked about, I think all that other stuff, terrain, yeah. So air, like air again, it's the same on attack. If you don't think you're gonna have green air, you want to put support AA in your infantry units, and that's going to help reduce the air superiority penalty. Air superiority will reduce your defense based off of how much air superiority they actually have. So if you don't have green air, the enemy is going to have air superiority. They're going to bomb you with their casts, and having some anti-air to help out with that's pretty good. Of course, green air is always better if you can get it, but if you're on the defense, a lot of times you have to make tough choices. Anyways, that's like the basic mechanics of defending. We talked about the org wall micro, which is like the very basic of defending strat. The other thing that you can do is if you have to do clutch defense. Let's see if we have a tile that we're about to lose. Let's just say this one over here. We'll even have these guys fall back. So you have your general abilities, last stand, and force attack. So we'll have these guys pull back. We should lose this battle pretty fast. And we'll get ready. So this guy falls back. And before these guys can move in, we're going to strategically redeploy. And we'll assign ourselves a new general over here. And we're going to slam the last stand tower. So you see these guys move in over here, and because we last stand, we're so fast with strategic redeployment that we're able to get there before the Russians move in. And because we're on last stand, it doesn't matter that we're low org because we take negative 100% org damage. Isn't that nice? And that'll give us more time to bring additional reinforcements in. So you can see we've blocked them from taking that tile now. So like that's a clutch trick you can do. If you didn't spot something, you see your guys fall back, you're like, oh fuck, what do I do? You have the second line over here, you can just do that. You can pull that trick, and once you have that, you can send in more troops over there, and these guys will hold on long enough to buy time. You can do the same thing with force attack. So force attack and last stand, the difference are, like you see over here, this gives you bonus entrenchment and bonus defense. This over here gives you bonus offense, like for attack, and bonus breakthrough. So if you don't have any entrenchment anyways, then a lot of the times you're better off doing force attack. Like if you look at this tile, I just picked last stand, for shits and giggles over here, but we have probably more than enough defense on these units anyways. So if you have more than enough defense anyways, you might as well just pick force attack to get the extra attack if you don't have any entrenchment. Both of these will give you the negative 100% organization damage. The other benefit to using force attack instead of last stand is that you can actually fall back. So if you're like, okay, great, these guys got in, I don't want this unit to die from taking the extra 60% strength damage. If you had done force attack here, you could still order this unit to retreat, but we can't retreat because we use last stand. So I mean that's the way she goes, right? But I just did that for as an example. If you use force attack, you could have had these guys retreat over here and then wait till the order wears off. And then you send them back up to the front line, so you avoid taking the extra strength damage longer than you have to. So like that's a pretty clutch micro trick that you want to have in your back pocket if you have the DLC to use these force attack and last stand orders. That can be real important for saving tiles if you weren't paying attention. Also, when you're on clutch defense and you have to worry about this stuff and you have to worry about org cycling, probably you want to play the game on 3 speed at the highest. Otherwise, you might miss things when you're trying to micro over here or something like that. Maybe things start going badly over here and your units fall back and you don't catch it. And then if you're on the defense, it's a lot harder to take back a tile than it is to org cycle to hold it. So like that's another idea that I wanted to talk about. So the other thing too that like I didn't really agree about with like the entrenchment stacking build and going all in is that for most countries, you are not going to win by defending. Most of the time, you still have to kill the opponent. So if you blow all of your research on defensive stuff, your offense is going to be so delayed or so weak that you're going to have a lot harder of a time, getting the job done. So like the least amount that you can put into purely defensive stuff, the better, in my opinion. Like you still want to have tanks, right? The tanks are usually the thing, though it's like the great equalizer in Hearts of Iron 4 against the AI. Is like once you start rolling out with 40 width tank divisions or enough 20 width tank divisions, the AI can't counter you, and you're going to be able to win regardless of how much of a numbers or an industry advantage they have on you. You'll have the template that they can't counter, and you'll be able to out micro them with them. So that's usually what you're trying to do. You're holding on and you're waiting until your tanks hit the field, and then you can counterattack and kill them. That's normally what happens. And if you watch our France game over there, like we can go back, I'll put that scene on over here. So this is our France game. And I think eventually we're going to get our 40 whip tanks out, and we'll be able to counterattack. Let's see if we can find a spot when that's happening. Like once you do start a counterattack, you usually clap them pretty fast. Yeah, so over here, tanks come out, and now we're pushing them. We're taking them out. Life is good. We push through Netherlands over there, I think. And we start with that attack. Yeah, make a breakthrough. So like that's what you're trying to do, right? You're holding on, tank units come out, and then you're able to crack them. Unless we're going for a pin here around the Maginot to get these encirclements. So if you go all in on defense, like the point when you can turn the tide is going to be delayed, and or it's going to be not as strong, right? You still need to close out the game somehow. And if the opponent is superior to you, which is why you're on defense in the first place, usually it's the tank tech. The usual tank techs are going to save your ass. And if you go all in on entrenchment stacking, you're going to have to hold on for longer, otherwise not have as explosive of a counterattack. So there's that. You still want to focus on your tanks. And then there's also, in addition to just actually holding, there's also the defense in depth strategy over here. So this is an example over here. We're playing as Ukraine in Kaiserreich mod. Yeah, in Kaiserreich mod. And this is from our Tenno and Tanks Playstyle Basics video where I talk about the tank build for Ukraine. In this video, we're giving up a lot of our ground. Ukraine has a lot of ground they don't really need to defend. So our infantry line is weak, and we are getting pushed back with our infantry line. But at the same time, we have divisions of heavy tanks that we rush, and we're using those to counterattack. And even though we're losing ground, we're able to get local victories over here, where the AI is kind of walking into unfavorable positions, and we're able to make small encirclements and kill the enemy over here. So maybe go up to 2 times playback speed over here. Yeah, so they walk in over there. We're able to use our tanks to make encirclements, and eventually we're able to kill enough AI divisions that they're not able to attack anymore, because they're not able to push our infantry. We achieve parity. Like we thin them out enough that we're able to have a stable line. So that's another option too. Whereas if you have an infantry line that's like not quite good enough to hold, but you have tanks that are good enough to push, you can kind of counterattack. You can play for counterattacks. You can play for these encirclements. And you see, we're just kind of like doing the same shenanigans over and over again, and trying to farm them. And like this up here is like all land that we lost. But we're still able to get the kills over here. And if you watch our the first German Empire Kaiserreich game I have, where we committed to tanks, kind of like the same thing happened. We had a lot of really bad flips. Poland stabbed us in the back, and we were getting pushed back pretty hard. But we were able to use our tanks to close out fronts and finish off these guys, and win through having the better offensive power. Like you kill enough enemies, and eventually they don't have an advantage on you anymore, and now you're the one who's got the overwhelming superiority, right? So that's like another idea. And then like as a really minor country, like this was a Lithuania game we played in Kaiserreich, and Lithuania versus the entire Reichspakt can be a pretty tough fight. And you can see like we've decided that we're not going to be able to defend most of our country, so we've decided to build up around our core cities, like Vilnius over here. We've got river lines, we've got forests. We've also thrown down bunkers over here, and we're just kind of castling. And then with the techs that we have, our divisions are good enough, and we have good enough terrain that we're able to kind of hold on and resist the German attacks, and we're even able to get some counterattacks in there eventually. So if you look over here, if they waste their organization attacking you, and you can just counterattack back into them and take a territory or take a tile pretty cheaply, and if you do that enough, If you do that enough, you're able to start to make some encirclements and get some value. So this is kind of like, sort of along the same idea of counterattacking with your tanks. You get a local superiority somewhere and use that to make encirclements. This is like this is a pretty long video. I think I'm gonna flick around here to go and and see where this happens. But that's essentially what you're doing, is you're waiting for an opportunity, take a tile, make a pin on this border, maybe encircle these guys or something like that. And you give up most of your country and you castle around your victory points, you build forts, stuff like that. And even though the Germans have like a much larger army than us, like they're not really able to get an edge on us, given the terrain that we have and the very short front line that we have that we're showing to them. I think at this point, I think France has already joined the war too, so like that helps a lot too. Lithuania is one of those ones too that we played that, and we don't actually have to kill the Reichsback at that point. We just have to occupy them and live long enough for Russia and France to do the job. We can kind of try and carry Russia and France. We don't have to do all the work ourselves. That's kind of like a unique one. So in any case, I guess that's pretty much, I think, everything I had to say on the topic of defense. So I hope you found this video helpful over here. I hope you found this video helpful. If you're trying to defend in Hearts of Iron 4, then those are the tricks you want to know. Set up in good terrain. Make sure you have a second line so you can org cycle, and try not to invest too much into defense, because you do need to close out the game eventually. And if you have the opportunity to make good tank divisions before the war starts, then maybe you don't need to hold a solid line. You can give ground and counterattack. So I think that just about covers it, and I hope you got something out of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Levy Freeman signing out.